first session, it will be chaired by Mike Phipps. Mike Phipps, he is a co-founder of Iraq Occupation Focus, which been in solidarity with Iraqi people for many years, and he is also the editor of Iraq Occupation Focus monthly.
Fortnightly.
Okay, and it's really worth subscribing to it. It is free, and it's full of, it covers all recent events in Iraq, a summary of events in Iraq, and it's worth reading every month. So without further ado, I leave it to start the session. Thank you very much.
Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. And the panel, the first panel that I'm chairing is we've got Mundher Adhami, who's going to speak about IDPs and mapping the current situation. Professor Dawn Chuckley can't be with us this afternoon, so then I'll be going on to Professor Hussein Al-Asharawi. And then finally, I'll be saying a few words about humanitarian intervention more generally. So each will speak for 15, 20 minutes or so, me a little less, and then there'll be Q&A, question and answer if people want to, and then that'll take us up to the break. So without any further ado, I'm going to ask Mundher Adhami to talk about IDPs and the current situation.
Thank you. I'm going to whiz through several of these slides, and I'm going to be reliant on the young people, who are helping us from Bolivar Hall. I'm very thankful to them for putting up with us. I'm going to whiz through several things to start with, because it's an overview and which includes a background to the region and to the country to make sense of the numbers, and which are, some of them are recent, some of them are historical, and then look quickly at the survival strategies by the displaced or the refugees themselves, by the nations in the region, and by ourselves. How do we survive this catastrophe? So, the first thing is about the region. You're all familiar with this, but I wanted to just mention that if you look at Iran on the right, and Turkey on the top, and Egypt on the left, they all are very big countries, which probably about 80 million people. They say about 90 or 100, but most likely they are 80 million people. And they are quite large compared to Iraq. All the area in the middle between them, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf and Kuwait and so on, are all also together probably about 80 million. So you notice that this area, which used to be the background, the backyard of the Ottoman Empire, was actually split up into smaller and smaller pieces. And this was deliberate by Sykes-Picot. And this is 100 years ago, this last month or something like that. 1916, the agreement between the foreign ministers of France and Britain. They wanted to involve Russia, Italy with that division, but then in the end, it ended up dividing it between themselves, and they drew the lines ad hocly on the ground. And that's created a lot of problems, and we're still suffering from them. The next one is about Iraq, and the thing I wanted to mention here is that all the towns and cities in Iraq are really around the two rivers, the Euphrates on the left and the Tigris on the right. And they come nearest to each other near Baghdad, where most of the capitals of all the civilization happened to be. And some of them are no longer there, even in ruins. And you notice that the left-hand side of Iraq and the right-hand side of Syria generally is a desert. But the deserts are gradually filling up because population are actually increasing everywhere. The next one is the difference between internally displaced people versus the refugees. This is a legal distinction. It's important to realize the difference because the refugees, by international law and by national laws which follow international law, have a lot of protection. They have rights by the United Nations Charter and so on. And so questions can be asked in Parliament. There is responsibilities on countries. But internally displaced people are not. They do not have any of these protections. So that means their problems are much bigger. So if we look at the latest figure at the United Nations, it's talking about it's last month of March alone, they added 80,000 people internally displaced in Iraq, and mostly they are in Anbar, in Mosul, and Saladin provinces in Iraq. We'll come to that a bit later. But this is an average increase, and the numbers have been increasing all the time, roughly at the same rate. So last year, 1 million people were added to the internally displaced people in Iraq. You notice on the right-hand side, it is taken directly from the United Nations, and the number now in May was as 10th of May. The date is 3.4 million people displaced, and the ones in the camps is only about 400,000, and the rest of them are scattered in 830 ad hoc places, shanty towns, places like old army camps, mosques, and in neighborhoods all over the country. So how to make sense of these figures? What I was suggesting, what I was thinking, is that it's important to compare them with numbers and areas which people, the English people, the British people, are aware of. We can compare the United Kingdom with Iraq. If you superimpose the map of Iraq with the same scale on the United Kingdom, you see that they are roughly the same size, and the distances between north and south, east and west are roughly the same. The population is about half, and the density is, because of the left-hand half of the country is desert mostly, the density of the population is also roughly the same. That hopefully can actually make people more aware of what's happening in Iraq. The next one, please. No, I think. So, if you look at Baghdad, this is 10 kilometers for that. You can see the scale down there. You can see Baghdad sitting in the place where the nearest distance between the Euphrates on the left and the Tigris on the right. And you see Baghdad, and you probably have heard of Abu Ghraib, which is on the left here, on the west, and you have heard of Fallujah. And you can see that Fallujah is no more than about 50 or 60 kilometers to the west of Baghdad. And Fallujah has been under siege for the last 2 years and has been hit several times before. That's one map which is important to keep in mind in the future. You notice that the biggest motorway in Iraq, number 1, goes to the west towards Syria and goes down through the whole of South Iraq, down all the way to Kuwait. That's the satellite image from Google. And you can see the dark areas are really the agricultural land, the greenery in Iraq. That area of Iraq is generally one of the most fertile in vegetables and fruits. And you can see it is all contiguous, all the way down to Babel, Latifi and Babylon, and north and to the west as well. This is the same scale to London. There's more motorways here, but roughly is the same kind of area which is inhabited in the area. And the population of Baghdad now is about 8 million. It's roughly the same as the population of London. This is London. It is much greener than around Baghdad, of course. Right, again, Mosul on the Tigris up north, 250 miles from Baghdad, is the size of Greater Manchester. And I put Mosul on here. These are the same scale. So you can see Mosul, you can see Manchester, you can see Basra. Mosul is 250 up north, and Basra is 200, something like 300 miles south of Iraq. Again, it's a way of making comparisons in the mind of somebody who doesn't know the map of Iraq. So, the comparison use. On the ground, the areas around Mosul and Basra are the same densely populated as Manchester. Baghdad population density is comparable to Islington, about 15,000 people per square kilometers. And the Iraqi provinces, which is called governorates, density are slightly less. They are comparable to Scottish districts. Now, the 3.4 million people who are displaced is the same population as Birmingham, Sheffield, Manchester, Bristol, and the whole of Cornwall combined. That's one way of looking at the numbers. Baghdad, I wanted to say that Baghdad is normal, or Iraq is a normal Middle Eastern country. It used to, before, has the same building like Cairo, Damascus, Tehran, and everybody else, even probably Istanbul, some of them. So you have these pictures of Baghdad, and you have old areas, and you have Tahrir Square on the left where most of the demonstration happened, and you have some monuments. This is for the martyrs, and some towers in there. The bridges, there's 12 bridges in Baghdad. Right. Now, there's one of the articles I reviewed was my international people dealing with this situation, is calling this crisis as the hidden crisis and the hidden waves of displacement. So, you can see the bullets. I don't need to read it completely, but there is this mention of that the internally displaced people, they either live with their relatives or among the population, or they congregate in different squatter locations around the country. So they are not in camps. Very few of them are actually in camps. And the camps are in mosques, old army camps, and government offices and homes of other displaced people. And that's the issue, that you have the displacement of Shi'is from predominantly Sunnis. This is now a common currency, and vice versa, and people go there. And the displaced often have tough lives, and they end up having, many of them having very tough characters, including criminal characters. And that creates a lot of problem. So it's an issue. I mean, it's the same as in Europe during the Second World War, after the Second World War. The displacement in Europe were comparable, or much bigger even, and you have a lot of crimes and gangs, and a lot of false identities, false papers, and people trying to rip you off all over the place. So similar kind of thing happened in Iraq. We should not romanticize the situation too much. So Iraq is kept out of the news, so this is one way of hiding it, because actually Iraq is a bad story. It's not a good story for the United States or for the UK. They don't want to talk about it, actually. They don't want to talk about these people in particular, because it's their responsibility. But the problem arose after the invasion and occupation of Iraq, and it is the responsibility of the occupying powers, it's the responsibility of the so-called international community. The waves of displacement, I think Dr. Yassin, Professor Yassin, will be telling his story about the waves of one, but the one I gleaned, because I'm not really part of it, while Dr. Yassin, Professor Yassin, remained in Iraq all through, and he's only recently here visiting. So he's better than me on saying, doing this, but I wanted to give the general figures. Is the first wave is the departification, and about 500,000 fled or has been displaced. And the second wave, 1.6 million internally displaced, and 1.5 million fled the country. So these are the two first waves. And they created this Ministry of Displacement and Migration. They created Property Claims Commission. These are the occupying powers created this. But both of these are not working well because they are not part of the government. The government doesn't work anyway. And the third wave is there was a continuous trickle of minorities leaving Iraq, especially the Christians, which continued leaving in small numbers each day or week. Now the fourth wave is the only one which is being talked about at the moment, which starts with the crushing of the protest and the rise of ISIS, Daesh. And this is the only one which is now being talked about. So I put the question, what happened to the first three waves of displacement? We can only speculate, and we say that they are scattered all over the place. They have been absorbed in the population. They changed their names, they changed everything. And they have been either saved or they have returned to their normal places. They make peace with their neighbors, or they are part of the new waves. But we have lost data on the first three waves. A lot of them are now, some of them of the first wave, because their qualification, knowledge of languages and so on. This is January 15. That's just over 1 year ago. And the numbers were 2.2 million. And you can see that the OCHA, the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, they give details. For example, on the map, you can see that where the camps are. The blue tents are the camps, and they are mostly in Kurdistan. The Kurdish region has generally been better at actually accepting refugees than the rest. To start with, they accepted a lot of refugees from Syria, Kurds, Christian, and so on. But then they accepted a lot of refugees from the rest of the country as well. And they are generally being much better than the government in Baghdad, refusing to allow refugees into Baghdad, for example. Although lately there was a mention by the United Nations that some families in the Sinjar region are between the two lines, between the Daesh and the Peshmerga, and they are being refused entry into the Kurdistan region as well. So there are problems even there. The next one. So this is 2015. I'd like you to read this because it probably tells it better than me. Okay? Now this is May 2016, so it's 15 months after, or 16 months after the thing. And you have the number of internally displaced persons now 3.4. There's an increase of 1.2 million in 1 year, which is roughly the 80,000 people being displaced every month, actually. And the important thing is that the 3 million of them are living outside the camps. They are not actually registered. That's where they call hard to reach areas. And you can see the area where Daesh operates. And you can also see where most of the internally displaced people's sites are located. They are everywhere. And you see the string around the Euphrates. Well, these are the numbers. We go now quickly on the reasons. And I can think of the three main reasons: the ethnic and sectarian cleansing, which Professor Yassin will be talking about a bit more, the bombing, the total destruction of towns and cities, and then the other reason is the Islamic State and the militia rules, where people flee. Now, about the sectarian rules, there is something that the top left map of Baghdad is around the river, the Tigris River. It's pre-2003, and it is this tan color. And we did not think too much about predominantly this, predominantly that. But the Columbia University maps, which now become to be a currency, talked about predominantly Shia, predominantly in green, predominantly Sunni in red, predominantly Christian in blue. And it was in 2003, they were everywhere. And most of Baghdad was not regarded predominantly anything. But now 2009, and you have the gradual moving people together. Now this is about destruction of towns. The official estimation of what happened to Ramadi is 85% destroyed. So actually, in order to liberate Ramadi, they had to completely destroy it. Nobody can live in there. So nobody went back, basically. Similar thing happened in Fallujah. There's no estimate of the damage in Fallujah, but because actually nobody goes there. And the Islamic State or the fundamentalists in there are not interested in showing problems. In fact, there was, because of the siege, there were cases of hunger and malnutrition, but they advertised that we have enough flour, we have enough dates, we have enough food, and they showed pictures of that. So they are not interested in showing the suffering of the people. And of course, the Iraqi government is not interested in suffering of the people. So people are actually suffering in between the two camps. The Iraq similarity with Syria. This is city of Homs in 2014. And now we have seen Ramadi, and we've seen Fallujah, and we've seen Beji, Tikrit, and several other places all around that area. And people are predicting the same thing will happen to Mosul. That's Kobani Ain al-Arab. I think it was 80% or 90% demolished as well. So to be liberated, cities are obliterated. Now, the last one I have is this. The title of this seminar is about the fragmentation of Iraqi society. And I was thinking about the metaphors being used about the fragmentation. So that if you talk about Iraq being a mosaic, you can think of the mosaic shattered and then resorted, as on the left. If you think about the Iraq being a quilt in patches, which are with seams in between, then you can think of it as the patches are coming out of the seams. But we mostly think of Iraq as interweaving of strands together, like on the right-hand side. And even interweaving, they can actually probably weaken and get loosened. But the interweaving of Iraq society, we think of, is alive. And there is a lot of evidence that young people in Iraq, in all ethnicities and religions, are keen to keep Iraq together. Thank you.